But I'm more interested in the journey. And what's so exciting about the journey is that I get to rub shoulders with all sorts of people. You know, this week I got an invitation by email to a 2-day conference that's happening right around Pride time. And I want to tell you, I get so honored to be your pastor. I get so honored by so many things that have happened in this life since in the 8 years that I've been in Los Angeles. And I've been invited to a conference with all of the heads of the church gathering together in Los Angeles. To the head of the Jewish faith, the head of the Muslim faith, the Archbishop Diocese of Los Angeles, Roman Catholic, whatever he is. The only thing I've got to worry about is what I'm going to wear that day. Because if there's one thing I'm really worried about is not being outdone by a big hat. So Carlos has a big job in front of him. Big hat, big hat. You see, we get to rub shoulders with all sorts of people. Isn't that the exciting thing about being part of Metropolitan Community Church is that we're not all one cookie-cut model. But we get to rub shoulders with all sorts of... I want to tell you that my faith has grown because of you. And your faith has grown, I hope, because of something that I may have said. But see, we get to rub shoulders with one another. At Bible study this past Wednesday, those of you who were able to be there, we talked about this topic, and Reverend, I have to keep saying, Reverend Dr. Pat Langlois, she got together with a whole group of you, and we were talking about what are the benefits of being part of this congregation. And what are the things that have pushed your boundaries and pushed your edges by being a part of this congregation? You know, I want to tell you, sometimes when you're in those homogenous kind of communities, it's really hard to be pushed. Because the reality is that in those communities, you're taught to believe one set of rules and one set of regulations and one set of things. But in this congregation, I don't know, I think if we went around, there's probably, 150, 160 people of us here this morning. There are probably 150 or 160 theologies in this congregation this morning. You know, we'd all believe something different. I'm glad that we all believe that Jesus is there. But the reality is we all believe some different things around the edges. But isn't it amazing that we get to push one another's buttons and step on our religious toes? And we get to step on them. We don't do it because we want to offend people. We want to do it because we want people to think for themselves about who is this God and who is this Jesus and who is this God that is impacting our lives. Again, we don't want people to leave their brains outside. We want them to bring them in and to be a thinking people's church. We want people to be adults in their faith relationship with God. And we don't want people to be afraid of asking difficult questions. Living the questions and living them out, because, again, the answer is not necessarily important. What's important is the questions and how we live them out in our lives. Living those questions for ourselves. And so Reverend Pat asked, some of you said, what is it that you have benefited from this congregation? And one of the things that came up in the answers in that dialogue was that I get to meet with people, or I get to be in the company of people that I would not have necessarily have engaged or even wanted to be in the presence of them. Can you imagine that? I get to meet with people that I would not necessarily have chosen to be in their company. I tell you, I find that exciting. I find that exciting because what that means is that our participation in this community is actually making a difference not only in our lives, but because they've made a difference in our lives, they're making a difference in the way we interact in the world. You know, we get to meet with some folks that we perhaps would not have met if we had not been here, or that we would have chosen not to meet. You know, we get to have our borders and our boundaries pushed left, right, and center. One of the folks in that room, and I don't know who it is, so if you're here this morning, I apologize, but one of the folks in the Bible study on Sunday said, I have been able to get over my fear of heterosexuals by being at Metropolitan Community Church, Los Angeles. Yeah, it's true. You know, the reality is that just as much as homophobia exists in the world, heterophobia also exists in our world. And there are many of us, because of the oppression that we have felt from the straight community, is that we have chosen to live in a completely gay world and not encounter the straight world because we're frightened that they're going to oppress us one more time. And one of the blessings about being in this congregation, and I always say this, we're not an open and affirming church here. We're an open and celebrating church here. You see, there's a big difference. Open and affirming means we'll put up with you. Open and celebrating means we want you, and we want you to be a part of this community. We're not a United Church of Christ. We're a metropolitan community church, and that's what makes a difference. And I love the United Church of Christ, don't get me wrong. And I love All Saints Pasadena. All Saints Pasadena this morning had the new lesbian bishop preach for them this morning at their 9 o'clock service. We get to do some great things together. But we in this church, we don't have to fight our denomination for acceptance. We don't have to fight. We just are. And the great thing is, it's not just about LGBT. It's about heterosexuals in our community as well. And that's the wonderful, wonderful blessing that we have. So for some of us, we've been able to get over our fear of heterosexuals or bisexuals. Don't want to out you this morning. Heaven forbid that I would do that on camera. Perhaps I should put a little label underneath him, bisexual and single. Very single. We're all in this together. Please don't put your phone number up. We reserve that for donations only. All in this together. That means I get to learn from you, and you get to learn from me. It means it's not important whether we're Jew or non-Jew, or Muslim or non-Muslim, or Christian or non-Christian. It means that we're on a journey to find truth. Now, I said right at the very beginning, we're very Jesus-centric in this church, and that'll never be the change. That's who we are as a community. That's who we've been called to be. But because of that, we have no fear of others who have a different faith journey or a different faith experience. And we want to work and live together in order that we can create some better good in the world. We're all in this together. That means that in this church, when one celebrates, everybody celebrates. Last week we celebrated with Reverend Pat and graduation as a doctor, and that's a major achievement in people's lives. But the fact is, Reverend Pat could not have done it. She could not have done it if we had not supported her in her ministry. So when she celebrates, we all celebrate. We all throw a big party. And when one of us suffers, we all suffer. When one of us is out of work, in many ways we're all out of work. I remember when Glenn was out of work. And I would try every week just to give him a call, or I would send him an email, or I would do something to encourage him. Even when I know, Glenn, you were almost on your last dime. And yet, in the midst of all of that, God came through. And I know we don't get to see you every Sunday now, because you have to work. That wasn't the deal I made with God. But when one suffers, we all suffer. When we get to put our services up on the internet, it's not just about showing the world, oh, look how fancy we are with our technology. We're showing the world that we want the world to know the Jesus that we know. And we want the world to celebrate with us and to join with us in this mission to create a difference. When we celebrate mothers in our church this morning, we don't just celebrate our biological mothers or our adopted mothers, but we get to understand that each and every one of us has a mother within us. There are times when the biggest mothers in my life have been men. And there have been times when the biggest fathers in my life have been women.